It is a great pleasure to welcome to this conversation Lauren Cohen, the L.E. Simmons Chaired Professor in the Finance and Entrepreneurial Management units at Harvard Business School and a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research. He's also an editor of the Review of Financial Studies, along with being a past editor of Management Science and serving on the editorial board of the Review of Asset Pricing Studies. Today, we're going to focus on a topic that Professor Cohen teaches at HBS. He's the faculty co-chair and designer of the HBS Executive Education course, Building a Legacy Family Office Wealth Management. I think that topic will be of great interest to many of our members. So, Professor Cohen, why don't you just frame this issue for us and how you've gone about addressing it?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So first, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to get to talk to you and all the listeners about this. This is a topic that is kind of and really has developed to be kind of close to my heart. But I've got to be honest, I think that's a great way to introduce this topic in this area. I kind of accidentally fell in it. And so let me explain to you to how, and that will be a nice kind of crescendo into what this topic is. And so I'm a professor here in the finance and entrepreneurship unit. So I have a joint appointment across those. And as part of what I do in the finance unit, I teach in the executive education programs here. And we have this executive education program that we teach to investment managers. And so, gosh, we've been teaching this program for decades now. And most of its participants throughout the decades have been, you can think here, mutual fund managers, hedge fund managers, sovereign wealth managers, pension funds. We'll get some VC and some PE managers every once in a while. But now about, 9, 10 years ago, we started to get some family offices. And first it was just one, and then it was a few. And I wanted to provide them best in class thinking in the space. I wanted to really help them. And so I went out to go and look for it. And John, it doesn't exist. And in fact, all that's out there was this super kind of conflicts of interesty stuff that was like, gosh, here are the 5 things every family needs, and we have 4 of them at Deutsche Bank. And it was all just really self-serving and not that informative material that could help these families think through the problem they were solving. And so that really got me thinking, look, we can do better, right? We can do better as just in terms of pedagogues and helping them to understand this, but also here at Harvard Business School, we can do better in the sense that we have a little bit of everything that families need. So we have a little bit of finance and a little bit of accounting and a little bit of operations and strategy and negotiations. So all of these pain points that these families face within all their enterprises, and so this is going to be operating company and their family office, we can just help them to delve into it and think a little bit more carefully about it. And that got me on this journey. And why it's so interesting, why it's been so kind of fascinating for me is I think I just got lucky and that I really kind of jumped into this wave and explosion of family offices worldwide. So let me give you a few just basic facts about this. So there are more family offices today than there ever have been. That's an empirical fact across the globe, but also that's a regional empirical fact, which is to say there are more family offices in North America than there ever have been. There are more family offices in South America than there ever have been. In Asia, Europe, Africa, you name it, this is really a global phenomenon. Secondly, there are more family office for a given level of assets and wealth than there ever have been. So let's take some kind of inflation-adjusted purchasing power parity level of wealth. And let's say that's $50 million in today's dollars back to 1985. Well, look, if you were a family back in 1985 and you had the equivalent of $50 million, you would just stick with your wealth manager at Morgan Stanley, right? You'd say, hey, look, I've been with Susan for the last 30 years. Susan gets us, I'm just going to roll it out with Susan. Whereas today, that same family is saying, no, we're going to explore other options. And those other options are these new entities called family offices. Now, family office is really, God, it is the description of a space now. There are multiple kinds of family offices. So these will range anywhere from single family office, which is what most people think about when they think about a family office. This may be the Musk family office or the Dell family office or Gates family office. So this is an entity that just serves that one family. There are multi-family offices, which are exactly what the name implies. So they serve multiple families, although when they get large enough, they actually start to look like a private wealth manager would. So that would be like the private wealth management arm of Citibank. And then there are these hybrid types of organizations. And those are things that are almost these kind of very small family offices or these outsourced family offices or things where the family does some things, but then it outsources just pieces of it to various different service providers. And so you have all of these different and novel formats, which are starting to come into and bubble up in the space. And I think that's a positive thing, right? That just tells you about how this space is growing. Now, what do these family offices do? Well, again, that depends on the family. And that's one of these really fascinating parts of this space that make it a bit unique, right? If you ask what a mutual fund does or what a pizza shop does, it's fairly clear, right? Is they make delicious pizza, hopefully, which is why they're still in business. Or a mutual fund will have an asset management mandate, but it manages those assets and will have even a universe that it defines. And that could be the equity space or even just a specific sector within that, maybe the tech sector. Whereas a family office, each family office is different and it's going to depend on the family's needs. And so I've worked with families that are, of course, like think G1 here and just starting that family off. So that's generation one. When I say G here, it's generation, and it's where they are within usually the establishment of their family enterprise. So the G1 would be the founder, right? Whoever that founder is. G2 would be that founder's children, and then G3 would be the children's children, and so on. So with G1 all the way up to G35 plus, so this is 1,000 years in. So there are those entities out there that have just been around that long, and those families that can trace their family heritage and lineage that long. And so they have different needs, right? A generation one and a generation seven will be different sizes and have different needs. And so that family office means something different for every family, depending how close the family is geographically, depending on if it still has an operating firm, and whether this is something that just serves as a kind of cash investment vehicle, or whether this is maybe they've sold out of their firm this generation or last generation, and the family office does much more. It is the glue of the family at that point, and it houses their philanthropic arm and social impact and their healthcare and education and all the other things they do for the family, and tries to manage their assets in a way that the family thinks is the best way that they can impact the world and the family, and kind of meld those two together in a positive light. And so in that sense, these family offices are really meaning something different for each family. Now, there's a saying within family offices, Jeff, that if you've seen one family office, you've seen one family office. And it highlights this idea that, look, unlike mutual funds where Fidelity and T. Rowe Price are going to look very similar, each family office is unique, that you can kind of now not learn something from looking at one family office and porting it to another. And I'll tell you this, that saying is wrong. Okay, that saying is wrong because while every family office is unique, it turns out they're also the same. They're also the same. And so what I found in teaching this program and really being lucky to welcome in many global families. And so we've had families come in from all 6 inhabited continents. And so no Antarctican families, but if you know any, definitely recommend them. So we've had families from all these continents to come in. And what amazes me every time we have them on campus is that they all really can point to each other and say, oh my gosh, you're us, right? So the family from Thailand and the family from Senegal and the family from Brazil and Canada and Germany, they can point to each other and say, oh my gosh, we're going through the same thing as you. We have a weird cousin who's doing this or doing that, or we're going through this issue with our operating firm, or we have the same issue with incorporating in-laws and how we think through that. And so what's amazing is how much they can learn from each other, how much we're learning from them, and then able to pass that on and keep that kind of virtuous cycle going. And so let me pause there, John, because I think that's a nice introduction to this space.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Maybe we could start a little bit with kind of the inception of a family office. And I'm not going to say a typical family office, given what you just said. But, What are some of the key criteria in deciding to set up a family office in the first place?
Yeah, and this is a great question. And so oftentimes there are numbers that are thrown out that you need. So I'll give you one number. One number that's often thrown out is you need $250 million in assets. And below that, it's just not going to make economic sense. And honestly, that's not true. Okay, you can set up efficient family offices with $100 million, $50 million, or even less. What is true is that for a family office to make sense for your family, there needs to be some function that is not most efficiently done within the other means that your family has. Okay, there has to be some function that's not as efficiently done within the means that your family has. And what does that mean? Well, a lot of these families have operating companies, which is how they've built the amount of capital they have that they're starting to worry about this. And I can tell you the typical entrepreneur in a wonderful and beautiful way, and this warms my heart as an entrepreneurship professor, the typical entrepreneur will just take the money that they're making and just throw it over their shoulder. And the reason is that, look, they've been through lean times. They're that same entrepreneur that was worried about how to keep the lights on at the beginning, if they were going to make it one more quarter, how they were going to hit payrolls and pay for their employees. And so they still very much have that kind of scarcity mindset where they're more worried about keeping things afloat than they are of what to do with that now extra funds that they're generating. But many of these entrepreneurs do get to that point, which is wonderful, where they are generating more capital than they will need today or tomorrow or in the foreseeable future at their firm. And instead of saying, okay, we're going to take that, we're going to be really deliberate with what we do with this and invest it for those other impacts that my family may want to put it toward, they just throw it over their shoulder and it piles up. And so at that point, they don't have the capacity and the bandwidth within their means at that point to use that capital to its kind of best use outside. And so that would be one motivation for starting a family office, right? Because they don't either, with the time that they have or the time and what their entity can do, they don't have the means to manage that in the most efficient way. Now, it's not that they're losing it, it's just sticking oftentimes in their cash within the firm, or they just have usually their CFO or their accountant for the firm just say, okay, just set up a separate account at the bank and we're just going to put it there. And then it just sits in a bank account. But that's not the most efficient way to do it, right? That's not really putting it to its most powerful use, because there are far better things that capital can be doing in terms of not only putting it to good use, but also to growing it, right? You can think, gosh, it could do so many things for our family or for maybe our family's desires. If we have other entrepreneurs in the family, or if we want to make an impact, or if we want to do something with philanthropy, but just growing that wealth, it could be growing much more efficiently and powerfully if you had a family office that was stewarding that capital for you.
So let's say it's a G1, a family office. How does that run, or should it run, and how do you involve the children in that? I recall the Buffett quote. I believe he said he wants to leave his children enough so they can do anything, but not so they can do nothing.
Yeah.
So, how can that founder think about setting it up the right way and involving the kids the right way so that ultimately, it serves the purpose of maintaining great relations with the kids, having them pursue their goals, and so forth.
Yeah, and again, this is a great point. I'm glad you're bringing it up. This avoiding of a silver spoon syndrome, right? This is one of the most common questions I get, and these families come in from around the world. And they say, "Gosh, Professor Cohen, we were up until 2 a.m. debating last night. How do we motivate our kids? How do we make sure that they, like whoever the founder was, if it was them or past generations, keep that same hunger to do well, like you're talking about, and to make sure that this capital is not something which has the opposite effect on them and our future generations." And so Andrew Carnegie had a very similar sentiment of Warren Buffett. And so And so, look, this is not a simple question to answer. And again, it's one of these questions where there's not a single solution that, say, all families can implement. But I will tell you one, John. I'll tell you one solution that I had this family that I worked with in Saudi Arabia, and a remarkable family who is now building into G3 and G4 within this kind of family enterprise that they have. They have an operating company, and they also have this family office. And what they do is that they implement an investing screening, I'll call it, for the next generation. So any next generation that comes up, they essentially say the following. They say, look, we are going to give you an amount of money. And with that money, you have to go out and invest in markets. And they do this for two reasons. First is to help these, these young budding Gs at that point, it can be G3, G4, to understand what markets are and to get their feet wet in investing. And secondly, for them to realize how hard it is, how difficult. Most of the generations, most of the investors, they lose it all. And then they realize, oh my gosh, this is much harder than I thought. Actually, this is not what I want to do. Just invest for the family and kind of live off of that. Let me go get my law degree and be a great lawyer or a great dentist or a great doctor. And secondly, and this is just as helpful, and this will certainly resonate with I know many of you out there, is that look, as parents, we love our children. I have 6 little ones, John. So I am certainly guilty of this, but we think our children, oh my gosh, they have great potential to be X, or they're going to be the next Y. And that happens in these family offices and family enterprises too, right? Parents come in across the generation, they say, it should be our child that's the next leader of the firm or next leader of the family office. Clearly, they're the ones who are most able and who will lead this in the most astute way. And what's interesting is that this investment game also helps the parents, because then they can see their children and that their children don't really love doing this, nor might they have the aptitude that they thought they did to begin with. And so this is this great game where everyone gets this kind of dose of how difficult this is, and it really empowers the family to then get that generation and the ones who are interested and who want to learn and who want to dedicate that extra time. It kind of selects in a positive way. So instead of adverse selection, which is this concept in economics, where you get the wrong agents selecting into whatever task you want to do, here you have positive selection. So you have the right individuals that bubble to the top and that say, look, I might have lost part of my money, but I want to understand why. And I think I do, but let me run it past you. Current runners of the family office. And then they talk and they engage, and it really kind of, it puts them exactly where they should be. And then the other members of that next generation, the other children, it pushes them out with that certainty into what they want to do next.
And how do you, or how should family offices think about capital allocation across a portfolio? So asset classes and those kinds of things.
Yeah. And so, again, this is going to be highly dependent on the family itself, right? And so each family is going to have different needs for that capital at different points in time. And so this is something where there can be families, and it can depend on also where the capital is located to begin with. So if, let's say, a family has made much of its wealth in real estate, and so this is the case throughout the world. And I'll give you the example of a family in Hong Kong that I was working with, and they had made their money with the hotel industry there. And look, not surprisingly, Hong Kong has seen incredible growth. Singapore the same way. Just this massive explosion in real estate prices there, as just growth in GDP and general economies there have absolutely grown miles in past decades. And so one great way to accumulate wealth has been within the real estate sector. And this family made their money in hotels. So they have hotels in now Hong Kong, and then hotels in London and hotels in New York. And so for that family, they have a lot of their wealth already tied up in these illiquid assets. And so those are things when they then think about their family office portfolio, they are not going to want to invest more in real estate. They will want to kind of do anything but real estate within their family office portfolio to try to diversify away from their operating company risk, because that's inherent risk that they essentially can't get out of, can't unwind, given that it's still generating returns for the family. So families that have this operating company, they may invest with that asset and with that wealth in mind. Families that just have the family office portfolio, for them, they are going to want to match their assets and liabilities, which means, gosh, our liabilities are how much stuff we want to spend on every year, right? What the claims are on this. And those claims can be from the family. Gosh, we really want to support education in our family, right, of all family members, or we want to support healthcare of all family members. And so that's going to be a certain percentage of assets, let's say 3% per year. And then they might say, gosh, we also want to give to our community. We really want to build the community where we live, to Kyoto. We think it's a beautiful city, and we want to help it grow. And so we want to give another 3% every year to Kyoto. And so they say, gosh, this is already now 6%, and then we'll tack on some type of, generalized inflation or some other measures, and they'll get to a target return. With that target return in mind, they will then create a portfolio that can generate liquid distribution, so that liquid 6% or 9% they need to give away each year, while also balancing the fact that the real and one of maybe the most important superpower of family capital is that they don't need it all tomorrow. They don't need to withdraw 100% next year or in 5 years, 10 years, maybe even 50 years. And that is such a powerful, powerful superpower to have. And families need to flex that. So if there's one thing I'd say that families should do with their capital, it's they need to recognize that that is a real superpower and they should not be wasting it. In other words, they should not be taking their portfolio and competing in markets where people need their money tomorrow or next year. So very liquid markets where these people actually have contractually can say, gosh, I can pull all of my money within the next quarter or in 5 years or in 10 years, because then they're doing their money a disservice and they're not earning that premium of that very long horizon that they have.
Wonderful. I just want to come back to something you mentioned earlier, which was quite remarkable, the fact that some families have been passing down the wealth for 30 plus generations or 1,000 years. I'd love to hear a little bit about longevity and some of the factors that contribute to families being successful over such long periods of time.
Yes. And look, I will give you the here's the truthful answer. If someone had the complete recipe for that, then all families would strive to do this, right? To keep this continuity and just to keep things moving ahead in a direction where the family can build on itself from generation to generation. That is not the norm. In fact, there's a gravitational pull for that not to happen, which says, hey, look, this is actually a really tough thing to do. And I don't want to minimize the role of luck, right? And that in any distribution and families and family longevity does not escape this. There are going to be some families that last an exceptionally long time or an exceptionally short time that are going to be fraught with issues kind of year after year, generation after generation, and others that will just kind of hit the jackpot through no planning or deliberate actions of their own. They just get lucky and they happen to be the G20 or G30 family. Now, that being said, there are clues to the success. Okay, there are clues to how some of the success can happen. And I'll tell you, I would say one of the biggest clues that we get from families that last a long time is that they don't split everything equally in every generation. And the reason I mention this, Jonathan, is that this is the predominant way throughout all of Europe, throughout all certainly of North America, and many other parts of Asia, Africa, and South America. That is a predominant way that assets, ownership rights, and cash flow rights are often split in terms of inheritance, right? You think about it, gosh, we have 4 kids, simple. It's going to be a quarter, 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 quarter. We have 3 kids, great, a third, a third, a third, and so on. And that is the simplest solution you can get. And people often feel like that's the fair solution, but that's not. that's the easy solution. That's the, hey, it's a commercial break on my favorite TV show. Let me just give a simple solution. But that's not the solution. That's often the optimal solution. And that's not the solution that has your family lasting a very long time. And so splitting equally is not what I've seen with these families that last a long time is that they don't do that, but instead they try to put decision rights and tie those cash flow rights to the really the person or a small group of people within each generation that can best lead the family forward for that generation and perhaps the next one or two.
Well, that's very insightful. Thank you so much, Professor. This has been extremely helpful and interesting. I wish we had more time. Perhaps just before we wrap it up, is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to mention?
No, Jonathan, I think that you've done a great job of bringing out really the big questions within this family space. And I look forward to coming back and chatting with you more.